Welcome to the statement, Secretary of State for Works and Pensions, Liz Kendall.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will make a statement on the government's welfare reforms. This government believes in equality and social justice, and we are determined to build a fairer society where everyone has the chance to fulfil their potential and achieve their ambitions, no matter where they're born or what their parents do. We know, as all Labour governments know, that the only way of unlocking the potential of individuals and our country as a whole is when we collectively provide real opportunities and real support. I am proud of the steps that this government has already taken to deliver on our promise of a better future for all. We're creating more good jobs in every part of the country, including through our modern industrial strategy and plans for clean energy.
Order. Can I just say to the front bench, it's just started. If you're not interested, I know my constituents are, so please, I expect the same courtesy when you speak.
We're investing in our vital transport infrastructure, in skills, and getting the NHS back on its feet. Our landmark employment rights bill will improve the quality of work, and our increases in the national minimum wage are helping make work pay. But alongside these vital steps, we also need to reform the welfare state. The principles set out in our Pathways to Work Green Paper are rooted in values I know many MPs share, that those who can work must work, but often need proper support to do so. Those who can never work must be protected, and that the welfare state must be fair both for those who need support and for taxpayers, so it is sustainable for generations to come. But the system we inherited from the party opposite is failing on all these fronts. It incentivises people to define themselves as incapable of work just to be able to afford to live. It then writes them off and denies them any help or support. The result is 2.8 million of our fellow citizens now out of work due to long-term sickness. Almost 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. That's a staggering 1 in 8 of all our young people. And the future sustainability of the system has also been put at risk, with the number of people on personal independence payments set to more than double this decade to over 4 million, with awards increasing at twice the rate of increases in the prevalence of disabled people in our society, adding 1,000 new PIP awards every single day. Now, I know MPs on this side of the House have welcomed many aspects of our reforms. Our plans to bring in the first ever sustained above-inflation rise to the Universal Credit Standard Allowance, the first permanent real terms increase in the headline rate of out-of-work benefits since the 1970s, and historic change in the direction of public policy. The biggest ever investment in employment support for sick and disabled people, quadrupling what we inherited from the Tories to £1 billion a year. Our plans to ensure that people with severe lifelong health conditions will never be reassessed, removing all the unnecessary and unacceptable anxiety this brings. And our plans to legislate for a right to try, guaranteeing that trying work in and of itself will never lead to a benefit reassessment, giving people the confidence to take the plunge and try work, something many organisations have called for years. But, Mr. Speaker, there have also been real concerns about our initial proposals. We have listened carefully, and we are making positive changes as a result. First and foremost, many members of this House, alongside disabled people and their organisations, have been very concerned about requiring existing claimants to score a minimum of 4 points on at least one activity to be eligible for the daily living component of PIP when they are reassessed after November 2026. And they've been concerned that the pace of change was too fast. I fully understand that even though 9 out of 10 people claiming PIP when the changes come in would be unaffected by the end of this Parliament, that this has caused deep and widespread anxiety amongst existing claimants because they rely on the income from PIP for so many different aspects of their lives. So we will now ensure the new 4-point requirement will only apply to new claims from November 2026. This means no existing claimants will lose PIP because of the changes brought forward in this bill, and existing claimants of passported benefits like carers allowance will continue to get them too. Now, some people have said they're concerned it will create a two-tier system. But I would say to the House, including members opposite, that our benefit system often protects existing claimants from new rates or new rules because lives have been built around that support and it's often very hard for people to adjust. For example, some people still receive the severe disablement allowance, which was closed to new claims in 2001. When Labour introduced the local housing allowance in 2008, existing claimants stayed on the old higher rates of housing benefit, and many people are still on DLA, which replaced PIP in 2013. So we believe protecting existing claimants whilst beginning to focus PIP on those with higher needs for new claimants going forward strikes the right and fair balance. The second important question raised by members was seeing more details of our wider review of the PIP assessment before being asked to vote on the changes in this bill, and many MPs also want to know the views and voices of disabled people will be heard at the heart of our plans. Yeah. So we have today published the terms of reference for our wider PIP review, led by the Minister for Social Security and Disability, to ensure this vital benefit is fit for the future, taking account of changes in society since it was first introduced. The review will look at the role of the PIP assessment, including activities, descriptors, and the associated points, to ensure these properly capture the impact of long-term health conditions and disability in the modern world. And it will be co-produced with disabled people, their organisations, clinicians, other experts and MPs before reporting to the Secretary of State by autumn next year and implemented as soon as possible thereafter. The third issue of concern was that our plans to freeze the universal credit health top-up for existing claimants and for future claimants with severe lifelong health conditions and those at the end of life would not protect incomes in real terms, even with the increase in the universal credit standard allowance. So I can today confirm that we will ensure for these groups the combined value of the universal credit standard allowance and the health top-up will rise at least in line with inflation, protecting their incomes from these benefits in real terms every year for the rest of this Parliament. And together with the changes to our proposals for PIP, this will ensure no existing claimants are put into poverty as a result of the changes in this bill. And finally, Mr. Speaker, whilst there has been widespread support for the extra investment we are putting into employment support for sick and disabled people, I know many honourable members on this side of the House have been concerned that this isn't enough. So I can today announce we are putting an additional £300 million into employment support for sick and disabled people. So we will be delivering a total of £600 million for support next year, £800 million the year after, and £1 billion in 28-29, increasing our total spending on employment support for sick and disabled people to £3.8 billion over this Parliament, because disabled people who can work shouldn't wait to have the same rights and chances to work as everybody else. And the measures we are announcing today will cost around £2.5 billion in 2029-30, and the overall savings and costing of our reform package will be certified by the OBR in the normal way at the next fiscal event. Mr. Speaker, welfare reform is never easy, but it is essential. because there is no route to equality or social justice based on greater benefit spending alone. The path to a fairer society, where everyone can thrive, where people who can work get the support they need, and where we protect those who cannot work, that is the path we seek to build with our reforms. Our plans are rooted in fairness for those who need support and for taxpayers. They're about ensuring the welfare state survives, so there is always a safety net for those who need it, and so it lasts for generations to come. But above all, our reforms are rooted in our fundamental belief that everyone can fulfil their potential and live their hopes and dreams if we provide them with the right help and support. This is the better future we seek to build for our constituents and our country, and I commend this statement to the House.
Secretary of State Alan Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement. This is a government in chaos. Open rebellion from their own backbenches, unfunded U-turns costing billions, and welfare plans that are not worth the paper they are written on. Their latest idea is a two-tier welfare system to trap people in a lifetime of benefits and deny them the dignity of work while leaving the taxpayer to pick up the ever-growing bill. Mr. Speaker, it is a long-held Conservative belief that those who can work should work. Work provides security and purpose. That's why we launched universal credit, simplifying complex benefits and ensuring that work always paid. And it works. During the decade up to the pandemic, we got the number of people on benefits and the benefits bill itself down. 800 jobs were created for every day that we were in office, giving millions of people the dignity and security that work brings. But then, during the pandemic, we saw something new. The health and disability bit of our benefit system started to break. The bill is forecast to hit £100 billion by 2030. £1 in every £4 of income tax will be spent on health and disability benefits, more than the entire defence budget. This is not fair for the taxpayer, not fair for people who are written off, and certainly not sustainable for the country. Yet, despite Labour having 14 years in opposition and now a year in government, they still don't have a plan to bring down the welfare bill or get people into work. What we now have before us is a rushed and chaotic compromise. It is not reform in any sense of the word. It is woefully unambitious about savings, conspicuously lacks compassion, and achieves no meaningful change of a system we all know is broken. Thanks to the government's latest climb down, we are left with a plan that will save just £2.5 billion of a £100 billion bill by introducing a two-tier system. Two people diagnosed with Parkinson's a week apart will now receive different levels of support, all to clear up an internal Labour argument. The government's own impact assessment shows that these plans won't get a single person into work. The idea that work is the guiding motivation for these changes is laughable. And it's not there aren't things that the government could do. They could reform the Fit No system, which sees 94% of people applying being told that they are too sick to do any work at all. They could say today that they would make all sickness benefit assessments face-to-face. And they could get a grip of the rising claims for common mental health problems like anxiety and depression. Claims for these and neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD are the main reason for the steep rise in the number of people in sickness benefits and make up more than half of all new claims. Absolutely. The Centre for Social Justice have found that you could save up to £9 billion by reforming these benefits. But nothing we've seen from Labour over the last couple of weeks suggests that they have the courage and conviction to grip this problem. And in the meantime, our welfare bill will only continue to rise. Mr. Speaker, we agree on the need for reform and have set out under what conditions we would support the government. First, the welfare budget must come down. Second, we need to get people back into work. And third, there must be no new tax rises to pay for increases in welfare spending. But with the welfare bill ever growing, unemployment rising and jobs disappearing, the bill fails on all accounts. So, will the Right Honourable Lady confirm whether the changes she's announcing today will be paid for through borrowing or taxation? Could I ask, where are these good jobs she claims to be creating when vacancies are going down and unemployment is going up? Has she read the impact assessment for their employment rights bill, which makes it clear that it will be harder for people to find work as a result? Why did it take them a year to publish the terms of reference for their PIP assessment review? And when can we expect changes if it doesn't report back until autumn 2026? Could I try one more time to ask what the difference is between her right to try guarantee and our chance to work guarantee? And finally, Mr. Speaker, is this it? Aren't there any more savings? Aren't they going to get any more people into work? Is this the extent of their ambition for reforming the welfare system during their time in office? In 5 years' time, is this going to be her legacy?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm in listening mode and I listened carefully to what the honourable lady said, and once again her strategy seems to be to rail against the problems she and her party created. I mean, she did have a bit of chutzpah to talk about a two-tier system. That's precisely what members opposite did when they protected people on legacy benefits, when they moved on to UC, and they replaced DLA with PIP. They are part of that, and they should admit that rather than making those points. She said we should bring back face-to-face reassessments. We are, because they switched them off. Yeah. But to be honest, I'm still no clearer about what their policy actually is. She and the Shadow Chancellor claim they had a plan to cut £12 billion from the welfare bill in their manifesto. But the truth is, it was nothing but a vague idea about turning PIP into vouchers, and she talks about fit notes. I think you tried to reform them about 3 or 4 times. It completely failed, as have all their other efforts. And the one change they did propose was to the work capability assessment, and their consultation was ruled illegal by the courts. What is beyond doubt is the mess they left our welfare state and country in. Economic inactivity rising, it's coming down under Labour. Disability benefits doubling and the cost to taxpayers soaring too. We are putting in place real reforms based on our values, fair for those who need support and for taxpayers. That's the leadership this country deserves.
I'm now coming to the chair of the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for her statement, and I absolutely agree. We must reform our social security system. Under the previous government, it neither supported or protected disabled people. I'm also very supportive of the principles that the government has set out. But can I just query some of the points that she has said, particularly about a new PIP assessment process under the PIP review that my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, will be undertaking. She said that 4 points won't apply until November 2026, and that the review will report in November 2026. But surely the PIP review should determine the new process. If this is being truly co-produced with disabled people and their organisations, the review should determine both the new process, the new points and the new descriptors. And we shouldn't predetermine it at 4 points at the moment.
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and I'm obviously looking forward to coming and giving evidence about our overall proposals to the Select Committee. The bill brings forward a 4-point requirement for all new PIP claims after 2026. I've been very clear this will only apply to new claimants. We are also committed to this wider review of PIP, so it's fit for the future. That will include considering the assessment criteria, the activities descriptors and the associated points to ensure they properly reflect the impact of disability in today's world. The review will conclude by autumn 2026, and we will then implement any changes arriving from that as quickly as possible. I would say that we have to get the right balance here, because we do seek to, I've been a long-standing champion of co-production, including when I was a Shadow Minister for Social Care. We have to do that properly, but the 4-point minimum will be in place for new claimants as we look to make changes for the future.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Prime Minister and many ministers have identified that the benefit system is broken and the cost of it is skyrocketing. But balancing the books on the backs of the poor is wrong-headed in the extreme. The proposals today are a leap into the dark. Colleagues, Liberal Democrat colleagues, and I are really concerned that these proposals are rushed proposals, and legislation that is rushed is often wrong with unintended consequences. As Liberal Democrats and the Member of Parliament for Torbay, we're really concerned about disabled and long-term sick, their children, their families, and also carers. There are some root causes here. Our broken NHS and social care system needs to be resolved so that there is the support for those who are most in need. Our access to work scheme is broken and needs resolving as a matter of urgency. There are some real challenges there, and so I hope the Minister will give some genuine answers around what consultation has the Minister undertaken with carers, and also what cost shunting have you identified for our care and social needs system with any proposals. And finally, will the Minister consider withdrawing these proposals so there is adequate consultation and scrutiny to avoid any bystanders being hit by these proposals?
The honourable gentleman for his question. I do know he cares passionately about these issues. He raises the urgent need to make sure that our NHS is back on its feet, and we are beginning to make a difference with waiting lists down for the first time in 2 years, creating 4 million appointments, more appointments in our first year, when that's more than double we promised. He talks about the failings of access to work. I absolutely agree. That is why, as part of the Green Paper, we are looking to reform it so it's available to more people in future. And we passionately care about family carers. And as I said in my statement, existing benefit PIP claimants will be protected as a result of the changes announced today, and all those carers who get their carers allowance because it's a passported benefit. I would say to him too, we are looking at the future of social care with the review by Louise Caseby. The reason we are bringing these changes forwards is we do not think that it is acceptable that the UK has one of the widest disability employment gaps in Western Europe at 28%, much higher than Germany, France and Sweden. We think that's unacceptable. We want to change it, and that's why we're making these reforms.
Can we try and speed up question and answers? It's not your fault. I'm just thinking of the numbers. Everybody wants to make a comment. I understand why. Joanna Baxter is a good example.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's statement and the additional £300 million for employment support, and also that the PIP review will be co-produced with disabled people and their representatives. But many of my constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South are reliant on the Scottish Government for employment support and also for getting waiting lists down to help them back into work. So can she outline for me what discussion she is having with the Scottish Government to address those concerns?
Well, our new Jobs and Careers Service applies in all parts of the UK, including Scotland, to help get more people back into work with personalised support. And I would simply say the spending review has delivered an additional £9 billion for Scotland, the biggest ever settlement in the history of devolution. And I just hope that the SNP matches our ambition to get more people into good work instead of cutting the employability budget as they have done in recent years.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the vast majority of people in this country believe in a welfare system that is compassionate to the vulnerable and particularly the disabled, but that they can no longer understand why so many people in this country, in contrast to other similar countries, have so many in this situation where they're not working. Yes, we were in power for 14 years, and during COVID, when as a minister we made decisions like stopping face-to-face assessments because we couldn't do it. But we all recognised that that process of recovering from that COVID time has not gone as well as it should have been. But I would say to the Secretary of State, if she cannot deliver the shift in the numbers, this economy is in a death spiral. She needs to recognise that these changes need to reset radically to meet the expectations of the country.
I absolutely believe that we've got to reset the system. We have to make sure that everybody who can work gets the opportunity to do so and the support that they need. That is precisely what we're trying to do with these plans. And I would just gently say to the honourable gentleman who I admire that it is precisely that failure and that mess that we are now trying to tackle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for the movement made in the last week. It would have been good to have had those conversations earlier. We are where we are. In response to my honourable friend, the chair of the Department for Work and Pensions Select Committee, my right honourable friends spoke about the November deadline and the 4 points kicking in. Could she explain to the House the rationale for settling on those 4 points in one category prior to the Timms review?
And I thank my honourable friend for her question. Our objective here is to, as it always have been, and I am grateful to her and others for all the engagement that they have done with us, and I'm very grateful for that going forward. But the reason we are making these changes is we have to both get more people who can work into work and try to begin to focus this really important benefit on those with higher needs, so it is sustainable for the future. That will not affect existing claimants on PIP. They will have their incomes protected. I think that is a very positive change that we are making. The Timms review will indeed look at those descriptors and the points that are allocated as part of a much wider assessment, because we have to make sure this benefit lasts for the future, to make sure it is always there for those in greatest need.
Marriott Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this week's U-turn, the Secretary of State just told us, will cost £2,500 million a year by 2029. So can she tell the House how she proposes to cover that expense?
This change will be fully funded, and it will be set out in the normal way. It will be set out in the normal way at the next fiscal event, as I'm sure all honourable members in this House would appreciate.
Rachel Musk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome progress, but I cannot countenance sick and disabled people being denied support to enable them to be independent in the future, and 150,000 people pushed into deeper policy, nor can disabled people across our country support these measures. It is a matter of conscience. So can I ask the Secretary of State if she could set out why we're voting on these matters tomorrow, when the Timms review says that there could be real changes in the criteria that is used to assess people up to 4 points. It feels like signing a blank cheque.
I know my honourable friend cares passionately about these issues, but may I just say, no existing claimant will be put into poverty as a result of the changes in this bill. The figures she are giving are about future notional claimants, and they take into account none of the record levels of employment support we are putting into the system. We have published very clear evidence that proper support programmes can get sick and disabled people into work, to stay in work, making sure they can improve their incomes and their lives. And I would say to all honourable members, we have absolutely committed to co-producing the Timms review. Indeed, we will be working very closely with disabled people about our reforms to access to work, how we make that Pathways to Work investment get the best results for disabled people and for their families. That work will take time, but we will implement the decisions as soon as possible.
Madeira Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Steve had been a fit, active working person until about a year ago. Since then, he's been debilitated by ME, which has left him only able to get out of the house for about an hour every fortnight. Even getting dressed leaves him needing a lie down. Now, PIP is already difficult for people like Steve. to access. He told me he would rather have lost both his legs than get ME. So could the Secretary of State tell Steve why, if he'd got ME 2 to 3 years later, he almost certainly wouldn't have been eligible for any PIP at all?
I'm deeply concerned to hear about what her constituent has been through. I have many constituents myself who have both real needs but also have struggled to get PIP, and we absolutely want to make sure that that whole assessment process works as effectively as possible, and I would urge her and her constituents to feed into the TIMS review. But what I would say just once again, existing claimants like her constituent will not lose their income as a result of the changes in this bill. It is very common throughout the benefit system to have existing claimants protected on old rules and old rates, and that is what we are doing today.
Dr. Bridton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome her words that recognise the need to enable disabled people to fulfil their potential. Since April, I've engaged with the government, making it clear I could not support the proposals on PIP. Our manifesto committed to championing the rights of disabled people and to the principle of working with disabled people. Having no public consultation of these plans excludes the voices of disabled people. This is not just about process. This makes disabled people worse off. The principle of fairness means disabled people had a legitimate expectation to be consulted, and in order to fulfil the Equality Act Section 149, Public Sector Equality Duty. Why did the Department for Work and Pensions choose not to consult with disabled people on PIP proposals, and what work will her department do to win back the trust of disabled people?
My honourable friend is a powerful voice, and I know she will always remain that in this House. We are absolutely committed to co-producing this PIP review led by Sir Stephen Timms. She may know we are also setting up collaboration committees on access to work and on pathways to work to make sure we really get this right. I look forward to meeting with her and many other disabled people and their organisations to absolutely make sure we get this right as we go forward.
Sir Desmond Swade.
To describe it as fair and equal, to treat people with identical conditions differently purely on the basis of whether they are an existing applicant, an existing recipient of benefits, is Orwellian newspeak on stilts, isn't it?
So why did his party do it for 14 years?
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement. Will the TIMS review have the powers to review the planned budget savings for future claimants of PIP and UC health components? And secondly, if claimants request a reassessment because of worsening health conditions, will they be assessed on the current criteria or new eligibility criteria?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. The PIP review is not driven by an objective of making savings. It's about making sure that this really vital benefit is fair and fit for the future. And as is the case now, people can request reassessments whenever they want. For existing claimants, they will remain under the new rules unless they request a reassessment until November 2026. And from November 2026 onwards, there will be that 4-point minimum.
Kirsty Black.
If this is what they think people voted for, what people wanted when they voted in July last year, why was it not in their manifesto? Why did they not put in their manifesto that they were going to cut the winter fuel payment, that they were going to keep the two-child cap, and that they were going to push 150,000 more disabled people into poverty? Is it perhaps because she realised how deeply unpopular and wrong these changes would be?
I mean, it was, I don't expect her to have read every line of our manifesto, but reforming the benefits system was in our manifesto, and so too is our commitment to tackling child poverty. And I would say I am beyond proud that the Chancellor invested the resources we need to extend free school meals to all families on universal credit and lift 100,000 children out of poverty, a down payment on our child poverty strategy this autumn.
Chair of Women's Equality, Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We
We all agree that the welfare system needs reform, but many of us in this place believe that changes for disability support should not take place without listening to disabled people's voices and experiences. Over the last few days, I'm hopeful that the government has shown strength in listening and moving on what they've heard. However, I have a question on the sequencing. What is the logic of making changes to future claimants before finishing the TIMS review, now co-produced with disabled people? Could this lead to not just 2 tiers, but 3 tiers? Those existing claimants, those new claimants who will lose out, and those post-TIMS review?
No, that won't be correct. As I've set out in my statement, existing claimants on PIP will be protected. But the reason that we are making the changes for future claimants is we want to start to focus that for future claimants on those with higher needs. But current claimants of both PIP and, as I've set out, on Universal Credit Health Top-Up, no one who are claiming those benefits will be pushed into poverty as a result of the changes in this bill.
James White.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Health and sickness benefit spending is set to hit £100 billion by the end of the Parliament. So why isn't she bringing forward proper reforms rather than these rushed cuts imposed by the Chancellor that only save £2 billion and duck the difficult decisions that deal with the scale of the challenge that we face?
I mean, perhaps he should make that point to his front bench when they had 14 years.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the clarity my right honourable friend has set out, particularly for existing PIP claimants and those with severe conditions. But my constituents, who I met this weekend, would want to be actively a part of designing the changes that affect them. So can the Secretary of State confirm that my constituents will be able to feed their direct lived experience into the PIP review?
Yes, as I set out in my statement, we intend to co-produce the TIMS review with disabled people, the organisations that represent them, other experts and MPs, so her constituents absolutely will be able to feed their views into this review. We want to strike the right balance here because co-production does actually take time. We want to do it as quickly as possible, but it's got to be done as effectively as possible. And I look forward to working with my honourable friend and involving her constituents' views.
Tim Farron.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke to a resident, a friend, in my constituency over the weekend. She's a wheelchair user since a failed back operation some years ago. She currently gets PIP. She gets 3 points for dressing and undressing. She gets 2 points for washing and bathing. She needs help with both. Yet she fears, as do I, that anybody with her needs or exact needs applying after next November will be left without help. We are right to be concerned and to fear that, aren't we? That is unjust and uncaring, isn't it?
I would merely repeat to the honourable gentleman that it is very common throughout the benefit system to protect existing claimants from new rules and new rates. But I would also say to him, we are putting billions of pounds extra into the NHS so people can get the health and social care support they need. We're putting the biggest ever employment support investment in for sick and disabled people because we know disabled people who are out of work are twice as likely to be in poverty. That's the investment we're making. His constituents will be protected and will not be put into poverty as a result of the changes in this bill.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her commitment to bring forward a stronger bill and work with colleagues across the House on this. The reality is any one of us in this House could become disabled. Disability does not discriminate. And it's important for us to recognise the network of informal care, which is keeping our social care system. And the reality is that for a number of carers, they would not be eligible for carers allowance without the PIP eligibility. And there are so many carers who are receiving carers allowance who are in poverty. Those people are not doing it for the money, they're doing it because they are wanting to help a loved one, a family friend. I know from personal experience, being a carer for my mum, when you're helping someone to bathe, someone to get out of bed, someone to cook and clean, the toll it takes on you, you are not doing this for money, but they are scared. So can the Secretary of State confirm that we will protect those carers in any future PIP changes, because it is right that those carers should not be pushed into further poverty.
My honourable friend is a huge champion of these issues, and I have long championed what unpaid family carers do. As she says, many don't even think they're a carer, they're just, a husband, wife, son, daughter, mum, dad, looking after the person they love. And I want to reassure her, as I said in my statement, that existing PIP claimants and all those who get passported benefits like carers will be protected as a result of the changes we've made. And indeed, I know my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, wants to do far more to support family carers in future, because without them, our NHS would collapse.
Does the Secretary of State agree that, whilst necessary at the time of COVID, the removal of the requirement for face-to-face assessments was an opening of the door to potential abuse? And if so, will she commit in principle to the reinstatement of face-to-face assessments?
That's exactly what we committed to in our Green Paper.
Good, Snell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Presumably the outcome of the TIMS review will require some form of primary legislation to enact the changes to the system that will come from the Department of Work and Pensions. In which case, Mr. Speaker, can I suggest to the Minister that removing clause 5 from the bill tomorrow and putting it into any future legislation means the Department can still have its thresholds in the future if it wants to, but only once everybody knows what the criteria against those judges will be made?
Well, we are co-producing this review, and it may result in changes that require primary legislation or secondary legislation or other action, and I don't want to preempt that. Let me just bring the honourable gentleman in the House back to what the purpose of these changes are, which is to make sure we have a system that is fair for those who need support and fair for taxpayers, and so that we do try and put the welfare state on a more sustainable footing in future. Because if we don't, my real fear is it won't be there for the very people who really, really need support going forward.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's statement feels like a panicked political fix to an indefensible attempt to cut benefits from the most sick and disabled people, but it lacks competence and it lacks compassion. And given that the Secretary of State talks about social justice, how can she justify people who might need that support in the future not receiving the support that disabled and sick people rightly receive today? And wouldn't the right thing to do be to shelve these proposals so she can allow time to do what she's promised to do and genuinely co-produce and consult with disabled people on the right way forward?
I just fundamentally disagree with the honourable gentleman's proposition. Our changes are rooted in very clear principles that those who can work should work and need the support to do so, that those who cannot work should be protected, but that we need a system that is fair and sustainable. And I do not believe we can wait. We cannot wait while disabled people in this country want to work but are denied the opportunities to do so. We cannot have a system where 1 in 8 young people are not in education, employment or training, with all the terrible long-term consequences this brings. And we cannot see 1 in 10 of our fellow citizens trapped out of work, economically inactive, because that is not a good future for them or for our country.
Derek Twin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we already know that the bill as published was flawed. We know that because the changes that have been announced today and have been made over the last few days. So while I welcome, of course, the wider review of PIP and the consultation with disabled people, their organisations and clinicians, I do have to put the question to the Secretary of State. Given this wider review, given the TIMS review is yet to report, why are we pushing ahead at this stage?
Because we have to begin to reform the welfare state to help those who can work to do so, to protect those who cannot, and to begin to put our welfare state on a more sustainable footing in future. This protects existing claimants. They will not be affected by the changes in this bill. It ensures that people have a right to try. It ensures those with severe lifelong conditions never face reassessment. It comes alongside the biggest ever employment support for sick and disabled people. I think that together, this is a fair and balanced package that meets the needs of existing claimants and reforms the welfare state for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were almost 1 million fewer workless households in 2024 than there were in 2010. And one factor behind that was universal credit and reducing the barriers and the perceived risks of going back into work if you weren't sure how it was going to work out. Now, notwithstanding the right to try, if there are in future going to be 2 different levels of health component outside of the severe conditions criteria, isn't that going to raise those barriers back up and do the exact opposite of her stated intent?
Fundamentally disagree with the honourable gentleman, who I have great respect for. I actually think that universal credit, some of this actually locked people out of work because they had to define themselves as incapable of work, unable to afford to be able to live. Fewer than 1% of people on UC Health, fewer than 1% move into work every single month. That is not good enough for them, their incomes and their life chances, and it's not good enough for the taxpayer either.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Secretary of State and her colleagues in the department for their tireless work over the last week, and I very much welcome her commitment to co-production with disabled people in the Thames Review. The atrocious handling of the pandemic by the previous Conservative government has left the economy and disabled people paying the cost. I would like to ask the Secretary of State to confirm then whether the Thames Review funding model will have the fiscal baseline of the 4-point system inherited, and if that is the case, how can that be meaningful co-production with disabled people?
I thank the honourable lady for her question, and I agree with her comments about the state of the economy. As I said in my statement, the 4-point minimum will not now relate to existing claimants. It will come in November 2026 for new claims. But the Thames Review and the co-production will indeed look not only at the activities and the descriptors, but the points given to them. It is really important that we don't set up a process of co-production and then overrule that. We want to have a benefit system that enables disabled people to have dignity and independence and the same choices and chances to live the life they want as anybody else. It's a really important process, and I hope that she and many other honourable members in the House will work with us to get this right.
Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with a support group in my constituency of Bristol Woodstock of those who suffer from ME, chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID. And their description of the devastating impact of these variable conditions was very affecting. I want to ask the Secretary of State today if one of those people were to have an improvement in their condition, such that they were no longer eligible for PIP, and then to re-present for assessment, would they be entitled to return to the PIP level they were on previously, or would they be treated as new applicants under the terms that she has described today?
The honourable gentleman raises a really important point, which is precisely what we want to look at in the PIP review, because it doesn't take into account fluctuating conditions. That is a really important issue moving forward, and I hope that he, his constituents and organisations that represent those with fluctuating conditions, we will be absolutely determined to involve them in the process of this review.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my colleagues in the Labour front bench for listening to what backbenchers have been saying for months now and for making so many changes. However, I didn't see any changes that affect young people, particularly care-experienced young people. So I wonder if the Secretary of State could cast some light on what discussions are ongoing with young people about the processes involving them.
I really thank my honourable friend for her question. I would say a couple of points in response. As part of the process of the Green Paper, we're establishing a youth panel to make sure that young people's voices are heard in our future reforms. And actually, many of the youth guaranteed trailblazers that we're putting in place as part of our £240 million Get Britain Working Plan are looking to provide extra support for young care leavers because they're in different circumstances and need extra help. I'm sure there's far more that we can be doing in future, and I urge her to work with us to make sure their views are heard at the heart of our plans going forward.
Sammy Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many on these benches who want to support the government in achieving the objective of getting people back to work and being fair to those who can't work. But does she realise how difficult her actions make it for us to give support? Last week, the Deputy Prime Minister stood at that box and said, these proposals will go before Parliament this week, they're fair, and if they don't go, there's a black hole in the economy which we can't fill. And this week, we're now told that, well, actually, there's lots of people who were vulnerable, and it's not fair, and they rely on the income, and we will find the money. And the only thing that's changed in the week is that 120 backbenchers signed letters that wouldn't support these proposals. Does she realise how cynical this appears? And this is not about well thought out proposals, but simply a way of buying back the backbenchers who were rebelling.
It may astonish the House that I think leadership is about sticking to your principles and values and listening to make sure that you get things right. I believe listening is a strength, not a weakness. I believe that in politics as well as in life.
Gregory Poynton.
Our welfare system must do much more to support and reward work, and also support people who are looking to re-enter or enter work. So what difference does you believe the right to try guarantee will help and achieve that?
Labour's historic mission is to help more people who can work into good jobs in every part of the land, not only because we believe it's the key to improving living standards, but because of the self-respect, dignity and purpose good work brings. The right to try is a really important step because we know around 50% of sick and disabled people say the reason they aren't trying work is because they fear they'll be reassessed for their benefits. We've got to put that right. But we have also got to put in place the employment support. We've got to create the good jobs in every part of the country. We've got to get those waiting lists down so people can get back to health and back to work. We are taking action on all those fronts, and I look forward to working with my honourable friend in his constituency so more of his constituents can benefit.
Dr. Caroline Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me entirely reasonable that a government should want to control the amount it spends on welfare, and entirely reasonable to want to focus it on the most in need. But I do not understand why they brought out such rushed changes which have done nothing but cause anxiety and distress, and left them in a worse position where now they've U-turned, they're neither making the savings nor reforming the welfare. So could the Secretary of State please explain to me what the rationale is for the 4-point limit that she's brought in?
For new claimants, it's because we believe we need to begin to focus this vital disability benefit on those with higher needs, because I am really concerned that a doubling of the number of people on PIP over this decade from 2 to 4.3 million, with claims and awards rising at twice the rate of the increase in the number of disabled people in society. I am deeply concerned that that risks the sustainability of the future of the system in future, and we have to make sure it's there for those who really need it, providing that vital safety net going forward. And she talks about things having a reasonable approach. I really do believe that this is. I believe protecting existing claimants, beginning to make changes for future claimants, backed by the changes for the right to try, stopping reassessments and investment in real employment support. I think that is the fair and right balance for the people who need support and for taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for her statement and her engagement. My question is about the co-production proposal. By what mechanism will that be given effect, and how is co-production here different to consultation? Will disability groups have any entitlements or powers beyond simply giving their views?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We are not setting out the precise detail of how co-production works. I think that goes against the very essence of it. We are already in discussion with disabled people and their organisations. On our green paper, we've already set up what we call collaboration committees on our reforms to access to work and our pathways to work investment in employment support, because we want to get this right. We look forward to those discussions to make sure people have a proper say and are fully engaged and involved, because we want to make sure we get this right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In her statement, the Secretary of State recognised, I quote, that existing claimants rely on the income from PIP for so many different aspects of their lives. One aspect, of course, for many is work. Why does she think that new claimants won't have the same need? And what aspects of their lives does she think they should curtail?
The Honourable Lady raises a really important point, and access to work is precisely there to support people who have needs over and above the legal requirements on employers to make reasonable adjustments. We need to fix that system because the backlogs are too long, not enough people are getting that support, and that is precisely why we're consulting on the future of access to work, and we will make the changes that people need so they can get the help they need to get good, meaningful work and stay in work and deliver that as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the changes, isn't it the case that over 400,000 disabled people, our constituents, who need assistance to cut up their food, wash themselves, go to the toilet, dress themselves, will be denied PIP from next year when they currently would have got it? And isn't the reality that Labour MPs will have to deal with this week after week after week in their constituency surgeries? And wouldn't it be better if, rather than trying to save political face, the government pulled this artificial politically imposed deadline of tomorrow? It's important not that we save face, but that we get it right.
Many honourable members have understandably raised concerns because their constituents on PIP right here, right now, are extremely anxious, even though 9 out of 10 of them who are on PIP by the time these changes come in would not have been affected. They will be protected in future. The TIMS review will look at this vital benefit going forward, the activities, the descriptors and the points it gets, and I really hope the Honourable Gentle will engage with us throughout this process to make sure we get it right.
Ann Davies.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Llafarydd. The UK Government's amendments to the Universal Credit and the Personal Independent Payment Bill weren't included in the initial statement on the bill's compatibility with the European Convention on Human Rights. Discrimination is a real concern, given that two people with the same condition could receive different support based on when they become sick or turn 18. So will the Secretary of State now make an updated statement on compatibility and also confirm that a department has complied with a public sector equality duty under the Equality Act 2010?
I can indeed confirm that we have complied with all of our legal requirements.
Stella Creasy. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't doubt the commitment of the Secretary of State to getting this right. And she will be very, very aware that as it stands, the legal advice we've had is that these proposals will breach our obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, something the previous government did, and we rightly challenged them on it. So that we do not make the same mistake, will she give a commitment to write into a bill that these proposals will be compliant with that commitment to make sure that persons with disabilities have social protection and the enjoyment of that right without discrimination on the basis of their disability?
I would simply say to my honourable friend, who knows I have deep respect for her, that I would not be making any changes that I believed were incompatible with the law.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the Chancellor will be delighted that the flip-flopping of the Prime Minister has meant that she has to find another £2.5 billion in taxation on people in this country. But does the Secretary of State think that it is fair that a two-tier system has been created? Because why would anybody on the old rate seek work when they know that if they go into work and it doesn't work out and they claim again, they'd get a reduced rate under her government?
Because PIP is not an in-work benefit.
Chian Mora.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The North East has the highest rate of disability in the country, 31%, and over a quarter of those of working age are living in poverty. So the Secretary of State is absolutely right to say that welfare reform is hard, it is essential, and it must reflect Labour values and disabled voices. So could she set out to us how the co-production of the new system with disability groups will ensure that it is a fairer system, and whether how North East disability groups will be able to be involved?
We will absolutely ensure that the views and voices of disabled people right across the country, including in the North East, are fully involved in our process of co-production. She is a powerful champion of this. I hope she too will get involved with our plans. The Minister for Social Security and Disability, Sir Stephen Timms, will be developing the process of co-production in close conduct with disabled people and their organisations, and I am sure that he will update the House shortly as these plans progress.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on page 3 of her statement, the Secretary of State asks herself the rhetorical question about a two-tier system. Can she simply confirm that somebody now eligible for personal independence payment gets it, somebody with a similar condition, whenever this bill has become law, suffers the same kind of condition, will not be eligible for personal independence payment, and their support will be either from friends or family or no support at all? Is she really happy that we're deliberately creating a two-tier system for people with profound needs and disabilities who quite rightly expect the community as a whole to recognise and support them?
Absolutely.
I would simply say to the honourable gentleman, there are many differences in the benefit system already, where people are on different rates and different rules depending on the time that they came into the system. That has always been a part of the social security system, including under previous Labour governments. The Timms review will look at the different descriptors and the points that are delivered to them, alongside much wider changes. I mean, the PIP came in more than 10 years ago. There have been huge changes in the nature of disability, in the world of work, and in society. We have got to make sure this vital benefit stays in future, and that is what the Timms review seeks to achieve.
I thought it would be helpful to let members know that I'm planning to continue the statement until 1:15. It would therefore be helpful if questions could be short. Alex McIntyre.
Mr. Speaker, over recent months I've been consulting with constituents of mine in Gloucester who have lived experience of disability and the welfare system and their representatives, and I know they'll welcome your statement, the Secretary of State's statement today that protections for existing claimants will be protected. But one of the most heartbreaking stories I heard of those consultations was a young constituent of mine who'd applied for hundreds of jobs, attended dozens of interviews, and simply could not find a job. So will the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss what more we can do, not just to support disabled people in my constituency, but also to encourage employers to take on some of the talented, brilliant people living with disabilities that we have in my constituency of Gloucester? Thank you.
My honourable friend raises a really, really important point, which is the world of work, and the need to make sure that employers recruit and retain more people with long-term sickness and a disability. That is precisely why, in addition to the huge advances in our employment rights bill, we have asked Sir Charlie Mayfield, the former boss of John Lewis, to look at what more we can do to support employers to recruit and retain disabled people. We are also, I should say, overhauling our job centres so that they provide more personalised, tailored support. And indeed, we have set our job centres a new goal of reducing the disability employment gap. I believe that will make a huge difference too.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome back. The recent compromise by the government with its own MPs secures PIP for existing claimants, but not for those who come hereafter. A distinction born not of compassion, nor apparently economics, but to secure the government's own political footing. If I'm wrong, will the Secretary of State describe the moral foundation for this distinction between those who suffer today and those who suffer in the future? Thank you.
I'm not going to take any lectures on compassion. I have fought my whole life to tackle poverty and drive up opportunity for people no matter where they're born, what their parents did, their gender, their sexuality, or the colour of their skin. And I would say to him, the social security system has many, many different rules for new and previous claimants. I do not believe that that is an unfair system. I believe it is the way that we protect people who've come to rely on that benefit. I am proud of the changes that we have announced today. I think they are positive and get us in a good place. Listening is a sign of strength, and I am absolutely determined to continue to listen.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for her statement and for the steps that she has taken to improve this bill. In launching the Timms review, she has accepted that the current PIP assessment criteria and descriptors are not fit for purpose. So can my right honourable friend confirm that the difference in the timetable for implementing the change which will require applicants to achieve 4 points in a single category and the timetable for completing and implementing the Timms review will result in some people falling between the old system and the new system, being required to achieve 4 points on criteria that are not fit for purpose? How long will this happen for? Who will be affected? And what will happen in the future to those people?
I would say to my honourable friend, who I know has worked extremely hard on all of those issues, it's actually an issue raised by a previous colleague. There will be two sets here: the people who are on the existing system, who will be protected, and the 4 points as we are going forward. But the Timms review will indeed look at the descriptors and the different points that they get. Those changes will come in as soon as possible. The review will report by the autumn 2026, and we will indeed try and put those in place as quickly as possible. But we do not yet know what that review will say, how those changes will be enacted, but we are determined to make sure they come in place as soon as possible.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't the problem for the government the failure of the Prime Minister to even seek a mandate for what he's trying to do? He said he'd limit spending increases to £9.5 billion a year, but increase spending by 8 times as much, and the effect on the fiscal rules is the root cause of this problem. He also won the Labour leadership by promising to, quote, abolish universal credit and end the Tories' cruel benefits sanctions regime. But then he masqueraded as a welfare reformer. Does she realise now that to win a mandate, you need to be straight with people, including their own MPs?
I am very proud of our Prime Minister, who changed our party so we can change our country. And the mandate can be seen by the number of MPs on the benches behind me.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Increasing access to employment opportunities for disabled people and improving the retention of disabled workers were urgent before. They're even more urgent now. My right honourable friend didn't mention the Mayfield review in her statement. She has just mentioned it in response to questions. Can I please push her on the review? First, can she expedite that review? Secondly, can it include disabled people more meaningfully than it has until now? And thirdly, will it indicate how the government will implement our manifesto commitment to increase access to reasonable adjustments? Thank you.
The Mayfield review will be reporting before the budget. I know that Sir Charlie Mayfield indeed wants to work very closely with disabled people and the organisations that represent them. He's actually seen very inspiring examples of what good employers are doing and good things that other countries are doing, which I think will provide some really insightful lessons. And I would also say to the House that my honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, has already said that we are looking at whether we should actually put in place a time frame within which employers need to respond to requests for reasonable adjustments, because we want to make sure those adjustments are made as quickly as possible so more disabled people can get work and stay in work.
Helen Maguire.
Madam Deputy Speaker, why are the proposed PIP cuts still being applied to new claimants, many of whom have equally urgent and severe needs as existing claimants?
The reason we are protecting existing claimants and beginning to focus PIP on those with higher needs in future is because we want a system that actually is sustainable and lasts. And I do not believe it is sustainable to have a doubling of the number of PIP claims every decade, adding 1,000 people a day, rising at a faster rate than the increase in prevalence of disabled people in this country. And the truth is, we know the parts of the country that have the highest disability benefit claims and incapacity benefit claims are the places that were decimated by the Tories in the 80s and 90s when whole industries closed, who have yet to have the investment that they need to create those jobs and haven't had the investment into the NHS. I have always believed in the social model of disability. We have got to put these things right. We need to do that urgently because disabled people deserve a better life than they had under members opposite.
Darren Paffy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for her work on this and for coming to make the statement today, though I do share honourable members' concerns that actually changes before a review remain putting the cart before the horse. I must just press her, while I welcome the changes that bring immediate security and protection for existing claimants, can she please confirm that if an existing claimant or someone on a legacy benefit is reassessed, will they be treated under the new measures or the existing ones? And for carers, future applicants will have that eligibility increased. So can she confirm if carers are going to be included in the co-production review carried out by Minister Timms?
Yes, absolutely. Indeed, myself and the my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, met with carers organisations the day after we published the Green Paper and many other disability organisations. I want to be crystal clear on this. People who are currently on PIP and are on PIP by the time these changes come in November 2026 will remain on that benefit under those old rules.
Jim Allister.
Thank you. In the first lines of her statement, the Secretary of State affirms that this government believes in equality. Where is the equality in evaluating one person's eligibility for the daily living component of PIP on the practical consequences of their disability and evaluating another according to the date of their application?
I mean, this is a really common issue within the benefits system, and if we could never change it, we wouldn't make the reforms to make it sustainable for the future. Existing claimants will remain on those rules even if and when they are reassessed. The changes will come in for new claimants from November 2026, but our review will look, as I've said many times before, at the different activities and descriptors and the points that they will get, because we need to make sure this vital benefit is sustainable for the future.
Ruth Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for coming this afternoon, and I welcome her announcement that the TIMS review of the PIP process will be undertaken in partnership with people with disabilities, because this is critical, because we know that currently over 70% of appeals against PIP outcomes are overturned in favour of the claimant. We need to get the assessment process right first time and every time for all applicants. Does she agree?
Yes.
Josh Babarindi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I decided to go into politics because I believe that luck plays too great a role in shaping people's respective courses and qualities of life. But unfortunately, the system that has been announced today leaves the fate of many disabled people in our country down to luck. Were you applying before November 2026, or were you applying after November 2026? I hope that the Secretary of State will reverse her decision and drop this bill tomorrow. But in case she won't, will she commit to engaging with Kathy, a disabled person in my constituency, who runs a Facebook group of 44,000 people advising on PIP and disability-related matters, in order to ensure that her voice and their voice is at the centre of their plans going forward?
I mean, I will absolutely commit to making sure her views and voices are heard, and I'm sure as a strong champion for his constituency, he will ensure that. But I don't believe it's about luck. I believe that parts of this country and different types of people have been repeatedly neglected and denied opportunities and support. There is nothing about luck here. It's about people and places that have been written off and denied opportunities for so long. Governments, if they're determined, can make a difference, and that is what we intend to do.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Regarding welfare reform, I've surveyed my constituents and submitted the findings to the consultation. I've met with disability groups across Swansea and disabled constituents to hear their concerns. But the problem that I've seen most prevalent in Gower has been the incompetence of Capita and the inconsistencies of DWP decision makers. And this is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I really do genuinely welcome the Timms review. So what reassurances can she give that the Timms review will address this and give confidence in the decision-making process?
She should 100% send me these findings and concerns in detail. One of the reasons that we are not only bringing back face-to-face assessments but recording them as standard is because precisely we want to get to the bottom of this and make sure we put it right.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over this weekend, I was privileged to be able to have a number of in-depth conversations with people and families living with disabilities. I'd like to thank the DOT, the Kindness community, for bringing that event about. One of the things that the people I talked to said to me again and again is how poor the health service has been at helping disabled people manage their conditions over many years. Could the Secretary of State set out how the DWP and the Department for Health are going to work together to make sure disabled people are properly supported into work?
My honourable friend raises a really important point. There is far more that the health service can do to help people with long-term sickness and disability to better manage their conditions. They can't do it on their own. They need the right help and support. We actually have a joint work and health unit that is working on precisely those issues, and I'm indeed working closely with my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, because getting people back to health and back to work is so important. We know good work is critical for good health, and good health is critical for people getting work. They're two sides of the same coin. We've got to stop these false divides, get it sorted to help people be able to fulfil their ambitions and work.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement this afternoon. It is vital that we have a social security system that protects the most vulnerable, the ill and the disabled. So can she clarify one thing that's set out in the bill as to whether the standard element and the health element of universal credit will both be increased along the lines of inflation, so they both will rise with inflation, as if that is not going to be the case, then disabled people will be pushed further into poverty and hardship?
Thank you. I want to be really clear about this, that the combined rate of the standard allowance and the health top-up will indeed rise in line with inflation, so that existing claimants are protected in real terms, and for those with severe lifelong conditions and those at the end of their life, their incomes will be protected through the combined universal credit standard allowance top-up in real terms too.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The bill still leaves over £3.5 billion in cuts falling upon disabled people and unpaid carers, with hundreds of thousands of new claimants set to lose thousands each year. Protections for existing claimants are welcome, but a two-tier system will generate hardship for many and create societal divisions. We're being asked to vote without vital evidence, whether that's the OBR's impact assessment or the Timms and Mayfield reviews, while serious questions remain unanswered. Without clarity on outcomes and implementation, will the Secretary of State continue to listen and withdraw this bill and co-design welfare reform with disabled people's groups?
May I say to the honourable gentleman, who I have great respect for, that none of this takes into account the biggest ever investment into employment support for sick and disabled people. People have often said, wait for the OBR's assessment, but we have published our own very clear evidence that good employment programmes can help disabled people into work. Programmes like Work Choice, a Labour programme ended by the Tories that saw 40% more disabled people in work for 8 years. That is based not just on economic theory, but on practical reality. That is the difference that this Labour government wants to make.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Disabled people's organisations have been clear that even with these concessions, they oppose this bill. The government talks of co-production in the PIP review, but it's not co-production if the government's starting point is delivering cuts, and it's asking disabled people where they would prefer those cuts to be, rather than how can we create a system that truly supports disabled people. Does the Secretary of State not accept that after months of the government ignoring disabled people, the only way meaningful co-production can take place is by pulling this bill and going back to the drawing board?
I would gently say to my honourable friend that we will be protecting existing claimants. That is the very purpose of the announcements we've made today, that no existing PIP claimant or those on a universal credit and the health top-up will be put into poverty as a result of this bill. Far from it. We are changing the system so that many more sick and disabled people who want to work can actually get work. That is about building a better life in future. This Labour government believes that if you can work and that you want to work, you should have the chance and choice to do that. 200,000 sick and disabled people say they work now, right now, with the right help and support. We are not cutting the support for that, we're actually increasing it because we believe that is the key to a better life.
Kirstine Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and indeed the recent movement to protect existing claimants. Now, I appreciate that adult disability payment is a matter devolved to the Scottish Government. However, my constituents are really concerned about the potential for differing qualifying criteria across the nations, which may result in limiting access to passported benefits from November 2026. So what assurances can the Secretary of State give my constituents that they won't lose benefits that they currently have access to and the vital support in which their households rely? And can also ask, following on from the response to my honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and Norwood, I'm really unclear now. Is this House being asked to agree 4 points without knowing the outcome of the TIMS review with regard to descriptors, or could that review result in more fundamental reforms that would rip up the current PIP?
And on the first point my honourable friend raises, she will know that PIP is devolved in Scotland. I believe the Scottish Government is actually reviewing the ADP at the minute, including on eligibility criteria. That will be a matter for them. But I want to be clear to the House that the new 4-point minimum requirement will come in November 2026 for new claims going forward. Existing claimants will be protected. Of course, the TIMS review will look at the different descriptors and the points that they should get in future, but that 4-point minimum in the daily living component for new claimants will remain.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The party opposite presided over multiple reforms of welfare and the results were a disaster. But perhaps cruelest of all was adults who have an irreversible health condition, who could never work, being forced to go through reassessment after reassessment, jumping through hoops. So can my right honourable friend please confirm that with these Labour reforms, that cruel legacy will be ended once and for all?
Yes, I can, because I believe the unnecessary and unacceptable stress that created was not right, and we will fix that with these reforms, with this bill going forward, because people need to live in dignity and security.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Labour Party is defined by work, defined by the dignity of work. So is my community in Gateshead and Wickham. The belief that you should be able to work to provide for yourself, your family and your community. Too many people in my community have been let down by successive governments of all sides by not creating the jobs that we need. And with a failed system, not one person who's spoken today, not one has defended the existing indefensible system. So what will the Secretary of State do to ensure that communities like mine, where work and a lack of work is the problem, receive the support we need?
My honourable friend speaks powerfully about Labour's historic mission to help people who can work to do so, and the fact that his constituents have been denied that support for so long. We want to transform that. We believe that in an ageing society where more of us will be living with a disability and with 1, 2 or more long-term chronic conditions and caring for people, that we have to change the welfare state. We have to provide more support to help people work. The world of work needs to change too, and that is why we've not only commissioned the Mayfield review, but that we are putting in the biggest ever employment support for sick and disabled people, and why I've announced an additional £300 million for that support today.
Can I please encourage members to keep their questions short, or you will not all get in? Harpreet Uppal.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker. Having met with disabled constituents over the last few months, there's no doubt the initial proposals caused anxiety, so I do welcome the changes for existing claimants and also the TIMS review, but can I urge the Secretary of State to look at the sequencing to make sure that review does happen before we assess new claimants. And just one final point, Deputy Madam Speaker, is the assessors themselves. There's no doubt the involvement of private companies has caused problems with the use of Capita and Maximus, and also having assessors who don't understand health conditions. Can we make sure we look at that properly?
Yes, we are absolutely committed to looking at that. In fact, we announced in our Green Paper that we are overhauling our entire safeguarding process, including the training of assessors. We want to get this right. We're also going to be not only bringing back face-to-face assessments, but also recording them as standard. Together, I believe this will make a real difference in the whole process to make sure we get the decisions, the right decisions, right first time.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. These so-called concessions go nowhere near far enough, and tomorrow I'll be voting against these cruel cuts. But I want to ask, could the Secretary of State name a single disabled person-led organisation that supports this legislation?
I understand why disability organisations are making the points that they do. That is their job. Our job is something different. Our job is to take the right decisions that we believe are fair, to make sure we have a system that works for people who need support, but that is also sustainable for the future. Yeah. That is not easy. I mean, that's a statement of the obvious. But I believe we have a fair package, a package that protects existing claimants because they've come to rely on that support, as is often the case in the social security system, that begins to tackle the perverse incentive that encourages people to define themselves as incapable of work just to be able to afford to live, and which puts in place the employment support to help the hundreds of thousands of disabled people and people with long-term conditions who want to work. That is the right way forward, and I hope that he and his constituents will get involved in the TIMS review to make sure future changes make sure this vital benefit is fit for the future.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I spoke to Mike, one of my constituents, last week, who's a disabled person who speaks on behalf of many disabled constituents across Warwickshire. And he is really pleased that he's going to have the right to try work. He's also really pleased that disabled people will be treated with dignity and will be part of a co-production of these new proposals. But he is still fearful that these changes may mean losses for disabled people like him and difficult situations. Can she reassure Mike that her minister will come to meet with him to discuss these changes, and also how in particular we look at fluctuating conditions like ME and like MS, which my partner suffers from, so that we don't lose out in those things, and we make these changes something that can be positive for every disabled person up and down the country?
We absolutely want to work with MPs, disabled people, their organisations and other experts as part of co-producing the TIMS review. And I think this point about fluctuating health conditions is really important and something that we have to crack for the future, because so many people have those conditions. They may be able to work one day, not another, 3 days at home, but not 5 days. That we've got to make this fit for the future, because the reality is we're living longer, more of us have disabilities, more of us have 2, 3 or more long-term conditions. The welfare state in its broadest sense, I mean the NHS as well as the benefit system and the world of work, have got to wake up to this, because as we live for longer, we will have to work for longer, but we've got to make that practical and decent.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a relatively small bill, but one core part of it has now been delegated to the PIP review and will not report until November 2026. So, can my right honourable friend say just how many disabled groups have indicated they want to participate in the PIP review? Because she set out a number of red lines today, which I doubt that they would agree with. And if they were to propose that we do not have a two-tier system, what would be the government's response?
What I would say to my honourable friend is that the Minister for Social Security and Disability and myself have met with many disabled organisations, and he has in fact spoken to many already about this review. We will continue to discuss with them precisely how the system of co-production will work, but I want to assure him that it is serious, that we want to make sure people's views and voices are heard, and I would encourage him as a Member of Parliament to get involved in that process too.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a signatory to the reasoned amendment, I welcome the listening that's gone on, because a lot of people with disabilities will sleep more soundly in their bed knowing that their benefits are protected. However, can you ask on this specific point, it is for someone who currently receives PIP, but their condition is getting worse, will they, and they ask for a reassessment for the level of their PIP, will they be assessed under the old system or under the current system or under the new one?
They are an existing claimant and they will be assessed, let me be really clear about this, under the existing rules.
Lauren Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today. PIP, of course, is a passport to freedom for many other things, such as carers allowance, but many local authorities use PIP for blue badges and bus truck passes. Has the Secretary of State have a plan to mitigate the impact of these potential changes to the eligibility for PIP on blue badges and bus passes for disabled people?
As I said in my statement, existing PIP claimants will continue to have that benefit. It won't be affected even if they have a reassessment, and so too will all those passported benefits. Carers allowance is the best known, but all of those passported benefits will be included in that protection.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier this morning I met with Parkinson's UK, who are very concerned with the changes to both PIP and universal credit, and it will not take account of those with variable conditions. Can she commit that Parkinson's UK will be involved in the co-design of the changes to PIP, universal credit and other welfare benefits, and that any welfare change will fully consider those with Parkinson's and other variable conditions?
I mean, I am absolutely sure Parkinson's UK will be involved closely in the PIP review.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. 2 weeks ago I held an in-person consultation on the welfare reforms, and many of my constituents were deeply concerned about the proposal, so I do welcome the changes that the Secretary of State has announced in terms of existing claimants. I wanted to just ask about the employment support, and I welcome the additional support being brought forward. When will we get more detail of how that will be allocated to schemes across the country, and will the people most affected who need it also be involved in the co-production of those schemes so they work effectively?
Yes, we already do have what we're calling a collaboration committee on the pathways to work funding to make sure it really meets the needs of sick and disabled people. And I would say, as I've said in this House before, you know, it really is about a pathway to work. For some people, just getting out of the house, well, getting out of bed is a huge achievement. Others, going along to a group, beginning to speak to other people, getting their confidence back. So it really is a pathway to success. We will obviously be setting out precise allocations of the pathways to work funding in due course, but I want to reassure members this will be really available in every single part of the country.
Tom Hayes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I grew up caring for 2 disabled parents. As a kid, I saw firsthand the harms that happen when the British state routinely lets down disabled people. It's why disabled civil rights activists have a phrase, nothing about us without us. And it's why I'm looking for genuine and meaningful co-production. On Friday, I brought together 7 Bournemouth support organisations and people with lived experience, and they wanted me to raise 2 issues. The first is continuing concern about eligibility criteria. The second is, will the mental health support that this government is rolling out be there in place in sufficient quantity to support potentially new claimants by November 2026?
My honourable friend raises a really important point about mental health support, this government is absolutely determined that there is parity of esteem between physical and mental health. We have already recruited 6,700 of the 8,500 additional mental health workers we promised in our manifesto. We're putting in place new emergency mental health services. We're bringing new Young Futures hubs, which will include mental health support. But I know that my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is determined to make sure that support is available in every part of the country. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more in the coming weeks and months.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for acknowledging at the dispatch box the anxiety of disabled people. I'm also grateful for the time of the Disability Minister in listening to my concerns about the PIP assessment process, concerns that I now see reflected in the TIMS review. But I'm sure the Secretary of State will be disappointed to hear that on a consultation event in the North East recently, some of my constituents found that the venue was not fully disability compliant. Can she assure me that the participation in the TIMS review will ensure full accessibility?
That's unacceptable, and I will sort it.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement. I wonder if she will reflect on whether the bill we have before us tomorrow is the best way of making welfare policy. And wouldn't it be better to withdraw the bill and wait for the TIMS review to complete its important work?
Welfare touches on the lives of millions of people in this country every single day, and making changes is never easy, and perhaps particularly for a Labour government, because tackling poverty and inequality is in our DNA. But I believe we must begin to make these changes, to make sure those who can work get the support they need, to protect those who cannot, and to begin to slow the rate of increase in the number of extra people going on to sickness and disability benefits. Because I believe the route to equality and social justice can never come from extra benefit spending alone. It has to come from putting in place the good jobs, the decent health service, the skills, the transport infrastructure, the good world of work that we know is the key to bringing in a better life.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's clear that the central issues for many on this side of the House remain. Rushing through legislation without full and meaningful consultation with disability groups is the wrong way round. You don't build policy first and ask questions later. The government's arbitrary deadline is not a necessity, it's a political choice, and it's forcing through decisions that risk pushing hundreds of thousands of more disabled people into poverty. Therefore, I say to the Minister with absolute sincerity on behalf of many members, do the fair thing, more importantly, do the right thing, withdraw this bill and listen to disabled people.
I believe we are doing the fair thing and the right thing. We are beginning to make reforms to put our welfare bill on a sustainable footing so it lasts for generations to come. We are beginning to put in place the employment support that sick and disabled people have been denied for too long. And we are making sure those with severe, lifelong conditions are never again reassessed, that there is a new right to try. Together, I believe this is a fair and balanced package, and above all, I believe it is the right one.
Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the government's work to ensure that help is there for those who need it now and in the future. Many in this House will be worried that the progress on closing the disability employment gap stalled under the party opposite at 28 percentage points. So will the Minister confirm that this is one of the metrics the government is focused on through this strategy, and that this gap must and will close under this government?
We are absolutely determined to achieve that. I do not believe it is acceptable that in this country the disability employment gap is 28% and is one of the widest in all of Europe. In France, Germany and Switzerland, I think it's around 22 to 23%. We have got to tackle that, because if we believe in the equal rights of disabled people who can work to work as anybody else, we have got to start making a difference. The package we are putting forward today, I know, that this is an issue of deep concern for many members across the House, but I believe it is a fair package and the right package. I will continue to listen to members in this House, but I would say we cannot wait to reform the welfare system. People need us to make changes and our country demands it.
Jenny Riddle-Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If my voice allows, can I thank the Secretary of State for listening to the concerns of backbenchers to make some real and meaningful improvements based on the concerns that we had raising privately. Can I also thank her for confirming explicitly a moment ago that my constituents who are reassessed post-November 2026 will be reassessed under the current system. Can I gently encourage her to go further to overhaul and radically rethink the role of job centres? Far too often they hold people back rather than break down the barriers to people progressing into work.
Yes, and I really thank my honourable friend, and indeed our Minister for Employment is indeed overhauling our job centres so that they provide personalised, tailored support for people to get into work, not this sort of endless tick box process, that they are much more linked to the wider system in local areas, to the local NHS, to skills providers, and above all, to employers. I do not think it's acceptable that only one in 6 employers has ever used a job centre to recruit. That's why we're overhauling our strategy with single account managers for employers to fully involve and engage them, because we need their involvement if we're going to help more people get work and get on in work.
Final question, Sarah Coombs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My borough of Sandwell has one of the highest rates of young people not in education, employment or training in the entire country. This generation of young people has been let down by years and years of system failure by the party opposite. So as we go through this necessary piece of reform, but we must do it carefully, will the Secretary of State commit to working with the Department for Education and the Department for Business? Because in order to give these young people the jobs which will transform their life chances, they need the right qualifications as well as those jobs being available in order to do that.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. Let's be honest, today's economy is brutal for people without skills. We're already setting out our plans to reform the system of apprenticeships. We want to see new foundation apprenticeships. We're bringing in new swap sector-based work academies, 6-week programmes that give people guaranteed work experience and a guaranteed interview, which I think will make a real difference to young people. There's much more to do, that we need to do, but our commitment to a youth guarantee, so every young person is earning or learning, I think is the key to a better future for young people and for our country as a whole.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement this afternoon, and I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over. Statement, the Glastonbury Festival and BBC coverage. Secretary of State Lisa Nandy.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the events at Glastonbury this weekend. Members of Parliament will have seen, as I have, the appalling and unacceptable scenes at Glastonbury on Saturday, where chants of death to the IDF and river to the sea, amongst others, were broadcast to the nation. I've been in touch with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, as to whether there has been any criminal offence committed. The House will know that decisions relating to specific cases are an operational matter for the police. Avon and Somerset Police have confirmed that video evidence is being assessed by officers to determine whether any offences may have been committed. They have just announced in the last few minutes that this has now taken the form of a criminal investigation. So, as I hope members will appreciate, it therefore would not be appropriate for the government to comment on an ongoing investigation at this stage. But let me be clear that this government will not tolerate anti-Semitism. It has no place in our society. It is a poison and a cancer that must be rooted out, and we will be relentless in our work to do so. This government works closely with the police and with community partners to ensure the safety and security of Jewish communities, and we will continue to do so following the enormous impact that these events have had on them over the weekend. Let me turn now to the role of the BBC. On Saturday afternoon, just after the broadcast, I called the Director General to ask for an explanation and what immediate steps the BBC leadership intended to take. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, it is essential that the BBC explains how these scenes came to be broadcast. The BBC has rightly apologised and took the immediate decision not to put this content on iPlayer. I welcome that. However, key outstanding questions remain, including why this performance was broadcast live, given the concerns regarding other acts in the weeks preceding the festival, why the feed wasn't immediately cut when the chance of death to the IDF began, and what due diligence was done prior to the decision to broadcast this particular act to the nation. I expect answers to these questions without delay. I have made that view clear to the BBC leadership, and I will, of course, update the House as soon as I can. Over the weekend and this morning, I have also had conversations with members of the Jewish community, including those who were present at Glastonbury. They have raised a number of concerns about imagery and slogans that were on display at the festival this weekend. And I am told that this led them to establish their own safe space at the festival. As a government, we take this incredibly seriously. We are urgently looking into the specifics of these alarming reports and reaching out to the festival organisers. Finally, I want to be clear about the government's role. As a government, we strongly support freedom of expression, and as Culture Secretary, I will robustly defend the independence of our broadcasters and the right to artistic expression. But we do not accept that incitement to violence, hate speech or anti-Semitism is art. There is a clear difference between speaking out for Palestine, which is the right of everybody in this House and everybody in our country, and anti-Semitism, which is not and which will never be. When the rights and safety of people and communities are at risk, and when our national broadcaster fails to uphold its own standards, we will intervene. In the coming days, I will be having further conversations with the BBC and festival organisers to ensure that lessons are learnt and action is taken. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Stuart Andrew.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Secretary of State for her statement and for advance sight of it, and for her tone. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always been a strong advocate for the BBC. It is a cornerstone of British public life with a proud history of cultural contribution. The events of this weekend, however, have made this incredibly difficult. During the coverage of the festival, the artist, as we've heard, real name Pascal Robinson Foster, led the crowd in a chant of death to the IDF, a moment which extraordinarily was transmitted by the BBC. Let me be clear, a national broadcaster funded by the licence payers must adhere to the highest standards of impartiality, responsibility and commitment to social cohesion. And I hope we can all agree that in this instance it has failed profoundly. Free speech and political activism are the sign of a healthy democracy, essential to it. But when you cross the line to incitement to violence, then there must be a consequence. However, broadcasting is not a passive act. Every second of broadcast transmitted is an active choice. Airing Robinson Foster's hateful rhetoric wasn't just a lapse in editorial judgment. It was a disgraceful affront to the Jewish community and a violation of the BBC's own public charter, and to entertain without undermining the fundamental values of our society. As the Secretary of State said, let us be clear that hateful rhetoric should never be cloaked as artistic expression. But it also raises fundamental questions about the BBC's institutional culture. This is a broadcaster that has time and again given airtime to representatives and supporters of Hamas, while refusing to clearly identify the group as what it is, a terrorist organisation. It has repeatedly failed to call out anti-Semitic rhetoric when it emerges under the guise of political commentary, and has faced serious allegations of minimising attacks on Jewish communities. The BBC's decision to also broadcast material from NECAP a group whose members have openly called for members of Parliament to be killed, is as indefensible as it is shocking. We have already seen the devastating consequences of political violence in this country, with the loss and the tragic murder of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. For the BBC to amplify voices advocating similar violence is grossly irresponsible. Even more troubling is that a leading member of the group is currently facing a terrorism charge. That fact alone should have prompted an immediate editorial intervention. Instead, the BBC gave this group a platform on a publicly funded service. I welcome the fact that the Secretary of State has spoken to the Director General, and I'm grateful to her for coming to the House to report on that exchange. However, I would like to press her further to ensure the gravity of this matter is fully recognised. Is she satisfied with the BBC's explanation that they originally decided that streaming the performance was in line with their editorial guidelines, and have now decided they will look at their guidance around live events so they can be sure teams are clear on when it is acceptable to keep output on air? Does she think the BBC's editorial guidelines were not clear enough, or does she think that the BBC misinterpreted them in the first place? And does she think that this sort of weak response will be of cold comfort to the Jewish community? I welcome the fact that she has spoken to the Home Secretary, and I wonder if she could also assess whether the BBC's actions constituted a breach of Section 22 of the Public Order Act. And does she believe the BBC's current editorial oversight mechanisms are adequate, specifically across the commercial broadcasting arms like BBC Studios? And does she think it is still right that the BBC gets to mark its own homework in the first instance before Ofcom get involved, and that an independent inquiry is what is needed? And in light of the repeated failings, will the government commit to a full review of the BBC's impartiality and governance standards as part of the Royal Charter renewal? And can she provide an update to the House on why the Charter renewal framework and Green Paper have not yet been published? Finally, can I thank her for her work so far? She will have the support of this side of the House, and I welcome her commitment to come back to the House to update us.
Thank you. I'm grateful to him, and I think all of those involved in the events of this weekend will hear the very strong feelings across all sides of this House, so I'm grateful to him for that. And I share his view about the importance of the BBC. I would say that those of us who do believe in the importance of our national broadcaster are probably more angry than anybody about what has happened over the last few days. It's precisely because we understand the importance of the BBC that we know that the BBC has to do better. He's asked whether I'm satisfied with the explanation that I've had so far. I'm not. I've been very clear with the BBC leadership about that, and clear that I expect to get a full explanation immediately without delay. He asked about the possibility of an independent inquiry. I would say to all members of this House that I'm not sure that you need an inquiry to establish that it should have been foreseeable that there would be problems with broadcasts this weekend, that the decision to broadcast live without any delay should have been reviewed, and that a live feed should have been pulled immediately when the chance death to the IDF began. So what I want to see from the BBC, and I know he shares this, is rapid action to make sure this cannot happen again. I've promised to update the House on these developments, but I should say too that I am still expecting a response from the BBC about an earlier decision to broadcast a documentary about Gaza, which it was then discovered fell short of the BBC's own editorial standards as well. So I expect a response quickly and swiftly, and I expect action as well. And finally, can I just thank him for mentioning the Jewish community, because having spoken to friends and colleagues across the Jewish community over the weekend, I cannot describe how much this has impacted on them, particularly those members of the Jewish community who were at Glastonbury. I was extremely distressed to hear that there were organisations whose logo was emblazoned very visibly on T-shirts and banners who are about to be prescribed by the government. I was concerned to hear reports that there were images associated with Hamas and others, and Nazi imagery as well. Most people who go to Glastonbury, I think, go for exactly the reasons reasons that I've been in the past, and I suspect he has as well, because music festivals are an incredible way to bring people together, to show support and solidarity, to bind a nation and to showcase great British talent. And it is our job collectively to ensure that those festivals become again and remain a place where everybody in our country is welcome.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As well as the despicable chants, the monologue that preceded them by the artist in question clearly drew on the influence of Jewish power in music, an age-old anti-Semitic trope. So could the Secretary of State say a bit more about what conversations she's going to have with the BBC on not just what they broadcast, but what was allowed to happen at Glastonbury? And will she also agree that those age-old anti-Semitic tropes, whether they're in Parliament, on stage or in public life, should be a red line for all of us?
Yes, and he has a very long history of standing up to anti-Semitism, including when it stained and sullied our own party, and I'm grateful to him for his leadership on this. I think those questions about what happens at Glastonbury are not for the BBC. There are serious questions for the BBC about what they broadcast and the decisions that they took. But I think there are wider questions about the sort of things that we want to see in our country. And I've been very clear as the Secretary of State that it is not for the government to try to determine what can be seen and what can be heard. But I do have a view about this as an individual. I don't want to see that sort of thing. I don't want to hear it, and I take great exception to it. And I think the Prime Minister was very clear on that point as well. It causes harm to people in the real world, and I have felt that very strongly this weekend. That's why this government is determined that wherever we see that form of anti-Semitism, including the appalling comments that he referenced that were targeted towards an individual in the music industry simply because they were Jewish, we will always stand up to that, and we will not hesitate to take action.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we welcome the statement made by the Secretary of State. Sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, rather than devoting our attention today to how this House can push for a just and sustainable resolution to the horrors of the conflict in the Middle East, we are talking about something else. On this occasion, and there have been past occasions too, this is deeply inappropriate language used by a shock jock, attention-seeking musician and a public service broadcaster's apparent failure to fulfil its responsibility to uphold its own editorial standards. Bob Vylan's chants at Glastonbury this weekend were absolutely appalling. We can never accept hate-filled chants of death to anyone in our society at a music festival or anywhere else, and whatever the subject. It's right that there has been widespread condemnation, including from the organisers of Glastonbury Festival, and I associate myself and my party with those words. Of course, the UK must push much harder for a ceasefire. Of course, we must put pressure on Netanyahu's government to roll back their military campaign and build a sustainable two-state solution. And of course, Liberal Democrats believe that cultural events must be a place for debate. But there can simply be no place for hate speech, anti-Semitism and incitements to violence at Glastonbury or anywhere else. It seems that an editorial failing took place in the BBC's coverage. The decision to proceed with broadcasting this act is particularly hard to understand, given the BBC's correct decision to take a more cautious but ultimately fruitless approach to the broadcasting of kneecap. A cursory look through the social media of Bob Vylan raises the question, how exactly was this not foreseen? And of course we know that kneecap is a group that in the past has called for death of the members of this House. The failure to effectively use delayed coverage and to remove the coverage in a timely manner is baffling. So can the Minister tell us whether, when asking the BBC about this issue, the subject of charter renewal was raised? And can she give us concrete reassurance that change will happen and we never have to put up with this kind of dreadful anti-Semitism appearing on our screens again?
Thank you, and can I thank him for his comments and for the tone in which he gave them. I think it's the responsibility of all of us, always, to stand up to anti-Semitism. I think it is sadly a battle that is never won. The lesson of history is that it falls to every generation to fight it and to fight it again. And certainly from our side of the House, I can promise that this government will always do that. But in relation to the specific question about the BBC and the subject of charter renewal, with apologies to my honourable friend for not addressing that earlier as part of his question, I haven't discussed charter renewal in the context of NECAP and the other acts that were broadcast from Glastonbury this weekend. We have, of course, discussed charter renewal, and and it is absolutely right to say that editorial standards must be part of that discussion. When we release the terms of reference, which we're due to do shortly, that you will see that everyone in this House will see a very clear commitment to that as part of the ongoing conversation that we will have about charter renewal. And can I finally say to him that I really welcome what he said about the death to anyone, and chance of death to anyone is not welcome in our society. But there was something particularly pernicious about chanting death to the IDF. Many colleagues will know that in Israel there is a conscription model. Every young person is required to serve in the IDF, which means that chanting death to the IDF is equivalent to calling for the death of every single Israeli Jew. That is one of the many reasons why we take this so seriously, and why it cannot be argued that this did not cross a very dangerous line.
Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for her statement, and I share her concern that whilst freedom of expression must be protected, this incident raises serious concerns about the editorial standards and judgments exercised. And as a long-standing supporter of the BBC, I'm so deeply disappointed in it. So can I ask the Secretary of State what conversations she's having with the editorial team to ensure that a serious incident like this can never happen again?
Can I thank her for that, as well as speaking to the Director General of the BBC. On Saturday, a number of my officials have been in touch with the BBC's senior leadership team. We have put to them a series of specific questions which we expect immediate answers on, and we will continue to press very hard to make sure that they are forthcoming. I will, of course, update the House at the earliest opportunity, and I expect to be speaking to the Chairman of the BBC in coming days.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Caroline Dinage.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I refer you to my register of members' interests. Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for that very strong statement, a very welcome statement on her behalf. The BBC editorial guidelines are actually on live streaming are actually quite clear. They say the level of monitoring should be appropriate for the likely content. A producer should normally be in a position to cut the feed from a live stream should it be necessary. So I wonder if the Secretary of State could say what explanation the BBC has given for why this live stream wasn't cut. Now, it can't be for lack of staff on the ground. They took a reported 400 people to Glastonbury at the weekend. What were they all doing?
Absolutely.
But for such a vast operation with simultaneous live shows all going out across various different parts of the site, I wonder if she's had the opportunity to ask the BBC, who has the final say on what bands are deemed suitable for live broadcast and why on earth they chose this one? And who makes the final decision when it becomes necessary to cut a live stream?
She asks typically a series of very important and relevant questions, some of which I have put to the BBC directly, but I will make sure that I ask all of those questions of them with a response expected as soon as possible. I think she's right to raise the question of what the number of staff who were present at the Glastonbury Festival or working on the broadcast were doing. But I do think this also raises very, very serious questions at the highest levels of the BBC about the operational oversight and the way in which editorial standards are understood and reflected in the decisions that are made by individual staff. This is a conversation that I've already had with the BBC board in relation to a previous documentary into Gaza, but it is a conversation that I will expect to be having with the board in the coming weeks as well.
And I refer to my register of interests as the chair of the BBC APPG and a former employee of Prospect and Vector unions, which represent BBC staff. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and indeed the BBC's own statement today, which makes clear that the performers' anti-Semitic sentiments were utterly unacceptable and have no place on our airwaves, and that the BBC will examine its guidance on live events to ensure teams are clear on when it is acceptable to keep output on air. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that it is possible to express concern about the appalling suffering in Gaza without using language that risks fueling hatred and division or inciting violence?
I think he makes an incredibly important point. As somebody who's been associated with the Palestinian cause for nearly 2 decades now and has consistently spoken out about the treatment by the Israeli government, not just of people in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well, it is entirely possible to stand up for the Palestinians and never ever stray into anti-Semitism. And there are many members of this House who've managed to do precisely that over many, many years. Nobody is objecting to the comments that were made that said free Palestine. What everybody is objecting to is the comments that were made that were clearly anti-Semitic, incited hatred, and caused real-world harm to people living in our country in the Jewish community. So I couldn't agree more with him and support him on that. And for those who say this is a freedom of speech issue, this is nothing of the kind. This is about standing up against hatred, discrimination, racism in all its forms, but particularly anti-Semitism, where we have seen an enormous rise in our country in recent years, and where every single one of us needs to be vigilant to make sure that it is never allowed to spread.
Jim Allister.
Deputy Speaker, what we saw was an appalling pro-terrorist broadcast on our national broadcaster, because when you chant kill the IDF, you're endorsing those who kill them, and those who kill them are Hamas. So it was an endorsement of the terrorism of Hamas, and yet the BBC deliberately chose not to cut the broadcast. Perhaps therefore it's time for government to consider cutting the licence fee.
Well, this government's view of Hamas is clear. They are a terrorist organisation. They are banned in the UK, and there is a good reason for that, and we will continue to be outspoken about that and to be robust in relation to them. That is one of the reasons why I was very concerned to hear that there may have been imagery, symbols and graffiti in support of Hamas at the festival this weekend, and one of the reasons why we will not hesitate to make sure that we deal with that and get to the bottom of that in order to stand with our Jewish communities and with everybody in this country who stands against Hamas and is at risk from them. In terms of the BBC licence fee, he will know that this government supports the BBC. We believe it is an important institution. That is why we are so disappointed that this has happened, why we have been so exasperated with the lack of account from the leadership, not just about this, but about a previous Gaza documentary and a number of other issues as well. The BBC is one of the most important institutions in our country, and that is the reason why it is held to the highest of standards, why it's essential that we hold it to the highest of standards as we seek to start the charter renewal process, which should safeguard the future of the BBC, not just for the next 10 years, but to put it on a solid footing for decades to come. These are questions that we are determined as a government, collectively with the BBC and all members of this House, to grip.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her excellent statement. The murder of hundreds of Jews at the Nova Music Festival in October 2023 sparked this war. The irony of broadcast anti-Semitism at Glastonbury here in the UK is not lost on any of us. So how are Jews, such as myself, in this country to be reassured about the editorial processes at the BBC, and who on earth will be held accountable for this error?
He makes an extremely important point about accountability, and that is something that is not lost on me as the Secretary of State, and something that I've impressed upon the BBC leadership as well. When you have one editorial failure. It's something that must be gripped. When you have several, it becomes a problem of leadership. And so I very much take his point about that. On the point that he raises, though, about the parallels between, not the parallels, sorry, but the strength of feeling that people have about this, given that it was happening, this was a music festival, and it was at a music festival on the 7th of October where so many young people lost their lives, others kidnapped to never return to their families, and some still being held hostage. At that moment, this would have been the perfect place to express support, love and solidarity with those who are still suffering. And I know that there were those at the festival who were doing precisely that, but they were hindered in that by some of the appalling scenes that we've seen. And that's why we are determined to grip this and to make sure that music festivals are a safe and inclusive space for everybody. As a government, we're also reaching out to other music festivals and to Glastonbury to see what more we can do to express solidarity with those who are still suffering as a consequence of the appalling events that happened on the 7th of October, and to see what we as a government can do to support those efforts.
On Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank Secretary of State for what she said? I agree with virtually everything she has said. When I heard these reports, I thought of the Mayor of Wilton, Councillor Alexandra Boyd, who is Jewish. And I thought about what it would have felt like for her to have watched this with her family. Can I say to the Secretary of State, I think we all in this place understand the fine editorial judgments that the BBC and their staff have to make. But this is of a completely different order. And when people are losing faith in the great institutions of this country, could I urge the Secretary of State in her follow-up conversations that she actually, the BBC actually identify accountability to individuals? My honourable friend has set out very clearly the guidance that exists. Somebody didn't follow that guidance, and I think the country expects people to be held individually to account for why they failed to do their job properly.
I think people do expect people to be held to account for the way that they do their jobs, be that on the front line or at senior levels. It's a point that I've made to the BBC. They will have heard what he said and what my honourable friend said as well about accountability, and it's a point that I will continue to press.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has spoken about the responsibility at the BBC and of those who said these dreadful words. But could I ask her, what responsibility do those people who are organising the festival have, both legally and morally, to be held responsible and accountable, and to ensure it doesn't happen again? Yes.
Can I thank her for that? And I deliberately included some words about the festival itself in my statement, because I agree with her that we all have a responsibility to uphold the highest standards and to ensure that people are safe and welcome and included at our shared national events. The reports that I've had over the weekend and this morning are incredibly alarming. They suggest that that was not the case this weekend, and so we are reaching out to festival organisers and investigating those reports to make sure that that can't happen again.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So another week, another month, and once again the BBC has got it horribly wrong with their Glastonbury broadcast with regard to Hamas and with regard to anti-Semitism. And once again, another grovelling apology. How long, Secretary of State, must this go on before, regrettably, many in the Jewish community and millions of the British people conclude that the BBC is institutionally anti-Semitic?
Well, I was going to thank him for that suggestion, but I think his views about the BBC are very clear. Those of us who support the BBC, who believe it's an incredibly important institution, however, will know that it should and does, in some instances, play an important role for all communities to be heard and feel valued as part of our public life. That is the standard that we expect the BBC to be held to. That is the standard that this government will hold them to, and we will not hesitate to take the action that we need to make sure that it does rise to meet those standards.
Yeah.
Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Congratulate the Secretary of State on her statement. Normalising, condoning, tolerating, the kind of things that we saw at Glastonbury over the weekend, history tells us never ends well. It ends extremely badly indeed. As a neighbouring MP, I have written twice to Worthy Farm with my concerns about kneecap, following reports of one of its members advocating the killing of MPs. No reply, none expected. Instead, it schedules Bob Villan, who we heard also advocates killing people, this time Jews. Does the Minister agree that it is no good Glastonbury's very wealthy organisers banging on about their festival being a safe space for everyone, whilst it continues to facilitate operations like this?
Well, I share his concerns about how this was able to happen, and I am sorry to hear that he has had no response at all to very serious concerns raised in a capacity as a democratically elected Member of Parliament for people in the area who deserve answers. That's something I'm certainly happy to follow up on his behalf and with him after this statement. I share his view that festivals, music festivals in particular, must be safe and inclusive and welcoming spaces. And I fear that we fell way short on this occasion. I visited Glastonbury myself before. I know that it provides an incredible showcase for a lot of British artists, not just those at the top of their game, but up-and-coming British artists as well. But as the organisers rightly acknowledged, a line was crossed this weekend, and that must not be allowed to happen again.
Gregory Campbell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and the sentiments contained therein. But would you agree with me that in the run-up to the festival, it was very clear to many of us, given the track record of some of the participants, that this was going to happen or something like it was going to happen. The government were aware something was going to happen. The BBC were aware something was going to happen. And still it happened. Where does the sanction lie? And who is going to implement the sanction? And when are we going to know what it is?
Well, can I thank him for that? I mean, I agree very much with the sentiment that much of this was foreseeable. None of us could know precisely who was going to say what, but I think even a cursory glance at Google could tell you that this particular artist has a history of provoking very extreme statements and behaviour, particularly in relation to the events in the Middle East. I don't think it would have been too difficult to foresee that, and I think there are therefore serious questions to answer about the issues around live streaming, about due diligence and other factors as well. Those are questions I expect a response from the BBC on, and the action that they will take in order to ensure that this does not happen again. If those answers aren't forthcoming, I do have various levers in order to hold the BBC to account, and I want to be clear with him and with the House that I will not hesitate to use them if I need to do so.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Had no chance been calling for death to any other people, nationality, ethnicity, there is no question in my mind that that live feed will have been pulled straight away. I welcome the Minister's robust statement, but the problem is this is systematic, isn't it? There's been a decades-long and deep-rooted bias at the corporation against Israel, and the BBC has seemed unwilling or incapable to deal with it, hasn't it?
Can I thank him for that statement? And I really do feel the strength of feeling and the anger and the emotion that is contained behind what he says. I felt that from the Jewish community as well over the weekend, and actually from all of us, including myself, who feel very, very strongly that this should not be allowed to happen, and it certainly shouldn't be allowed to continually and repeatedly happen. As to whether there's a question of inbuilt bias at the BBC, I think what has happened here is a serious failing of editorial standards, leadership and oversight. It's that I need to make sure that we address, particularly because he said that if it had been any other group, it probably would have been pulled straight away. I'm not sure that we can say that with any confidence, actually, given that, as the chair of the Select Committee just made clear, there were hundreds of BBC staff involved in this production. There were the BBC was represented at Glastonbury at the most senior level, and yet the feed wasn't pulled and the standards weren't upheld. It's my job to make sure that regardless of which community it affects, that those standards are upheld, and I give him my word that I will use every lever at my disposal to make sure that that happens.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish we lived in a world where there was no chanting of death. Any form of racism is vile, be that Islamophobic, anti-Semitism or any other kind. The Secretary of State will probably recall only last year in November the Israeli football fans which were chanting death to all Arabs, and more sickening perhaps, there are no schools in Gaza because there are no children. That kind of speech and chanting must equally be condemned. And what's sad is that whilst we have a ministerial statement here today, we did not have any ministerial statement when that chanting happened. It's the hypocrisy which is causing an outrage in the British public. Does the Minister not agree that that is what's happening out there in the community?
No. Could not disagree more. And I would just say to him that, of course, absolutely, and I think every member of this House will utterly condemn chants of death to all Arabs. It's disgusting and disgraceful. It's a principle by which we hold ourselves. And there is no hesitation from anybody in this House. The reason I've brought a statement to the House today is because our national broadcaster, which is funded by the licence fee, which is paid by the public in this country, has broadcast something that is deeply, deeply offensive to a community in this country, that has made many, many people feel, and may actually have made them, unsafe. That is the most serious thing that you can imagine. It is rightly a question for government, and that's why I didn't hesitate to bring it to the House today. If this had been a broadcast that had led with the chant that he describes, broadcast by the BBC, you would be having the same statement at this dispatch box, and you would be getting the same response from other members of the House. And can I just say to him that it does, as somebody who has stood up for the Palestinian cause for the last nearly best part of 2 decades in this House, especially when it was hard, and especially when it was unpopular, and especially when it cost me friends and colleagues, and has stood alongside many members of this House in order to highlight the plight of the Palestinian people. Can I just say to him that as a long-standing supporter of justice for the Palestinians, he does nothing for the Palestinian cause by aligning himself with anti-Semites.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A blind man on a horse could see there was going to be difficulties broadcasting a band called Kneecap, named after a terrorist punishment. People who'd called for the death of people in this House, and we should take a moment here now to reflect on the fact that Eddie Neve and Ian Gow were both killed by Republican murderers. Yep. Is it not the case, however, that there is a pattern emerging here with the BBC, given the events of the weekend and given previous incidents, that will she at least test the idea that the BBC has a fundamental problem with Israel?
Secretary of State. Let me first of all recognise that the BBC has been criticised by all sides in this conflict for bias, which shows the very difficult editorial line that they have to walk. But let me also be clear that when it comes to what happened this weekend, as the BBC itself has rightly acknowledged, the coverage, the standards, the enforcement of those standards fell well short of what was expected. And let me acknowledge that that's not the first time in recent months that that's happened. Let me assure him that the government takes this incredibly seriously. We are having discussions with the BBC at the most senior levels in order to make sure that this is gripped. And as I said previously to other colleagues in the House, I do have levers at my disposal and I will not hesitate to use them should I need to.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think that anyone who witnessed the disgusting images of young, middle-class, educated morons chanting death to IDF soldiers at the weekend can only be alarmed that we've stooped to this level in our society. But even worse, the state broadcaster should then broadcast those images across the nation. And I welcome what the Minister has said today and the way in which she has said it. But if we look at what she has spoken about, she has called the director, she has asked for immediate explanations, and she's expecting answers. But given that the BBC has already ignored calls from this House to explain its bias, does she really expect that she's going to get any satisfactory answers from an institution which is anti-Semitic, I believe, at its very core? And does she have any confidence in any police investigation, given that the police have already decided not to prosecute the member of NECAP who called for the killing of Tory MPs?
Well, the police have just announced in the last few minutes before we came into the chamber for this statement that there is now an ongoing criminal investigation. I think it's important that we allow the police to do their work. Of course, wouldn't hesitate to call the Director General of the BBC and ask for an explanation. I do expect that explanation to be forthcoming. I expect it to be satisfactory, by which I do not mean that I expect excuses about what has or has not been done in this instance. What I expect is a full and honest explanation of what has clearly gone wrong on this occasion, and a full explanation of what will be done, not through another review, not with months and months of delay, not by spending public money on trying to get to the bottom of what has gone wrong, but what will be done immediately to make sure that this cannot happen again.
Point of order, Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State, in answering my question, said towards the end that I did no favours to the Palestinian cause by aligning myself to anti-Semites. Now, at no stage have I said in my question or statement that I was aligning myself to anyone at that Glastonbury event. So will the Secretary of State clarify what she meant? And if she didn't mean that, then I apologise, but I'd like some clarity on that.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order, which in fact was not a point of order, and I do not intend to allow the debate to continue via points of order. I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over. Come now to a statement on the Prax Lindsay oil refinery. Minister Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With permission, I'd like to make a statement about the Prax Lindsay oil refinery. Today, its owners have declared insolvency at the refinery. The Government is urgently acting in response to this deeply concerning news. And I know it will be extremely worrying news for workers at the refinery as well as the wider community in Lincolnshire. And let me say very clearly, the Government stands with the workers, the families and the wider community at this difficult time. They have been let down by the company, but we will ensure that they are supported. Let me first take the House through the chain of events leading up to today and then the actions that we will take in response. There have been long-standing issues at the refinery since it was acquired in 2021. At the end of April, the Government was informed of ongoing commercial difficulties, and the Energy Secretary met the Chief Executive on the 13th of May to see how the Government could provide support. The Secretary of State was reassured by the company that there was no immediate closure risk at the refinery. A week ago, the business changed their position and said they feared it could no longer be a going concern. We repeatedly asked them at official and ministerial level what the financial gap was to work out whether the Government could help bridge that gap. But the company were unable to share that basic information. As a result of today's decision by the company, an official receiver and administrators have been appointed to take over different parts of the business. and the Government will ensure supplies are maintained, protect our energy security and do everything we can to support the workers, including engaging with trade unions and industry bodies. Let me update the House on the Government's response. First, we will work with the official receiver over the coming days and weeks to manage the situation at the Lindsay oil refinery site and determine the next steps. The official receiver will take immediate steps to ensure safe operations at the site, ensure continued fuel supply and explore all credible options for a sale. Unfortunately, the refinery has consistently failed to make a profit since it was bought by the current owners from Total in 2021. It's recorded a total of around £75 million worth of losses between its acquisition in 2021 and the financial year ending in February 2024. This has left the refinery in a situation in which it is in very bad shape, and the company has left the Government with very little time to act. We are supporting the official receiver to carry out their statutory duties, including managing the situation on the site to determine next steps. This will include urgently reporting back on the steps, including all potential uses of the site, prior to wind down of the refinery. As to the wider business, there are extensive operational and financing interdependencies within the Prax Group, which mean that the refinery's parent company, State Oil Limited, has also been placed into administration today, along with a small number of other group entities. However, other parts of the group, including its UK retail business, have not gone into administration. The retail business will trade as normal while the administrators look to secure a sale in due course. Second, there are questions that now must be answered about how the owners allowed this situation to happen. That's why my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, has today written to the Insolvency Service to demand an immediate investigation into the conduct of the directors and the circumstances surrounding this insolvency. Third, as we engage in this work, our immediate priority is to ensure that affected workers at the Prax Lindsay refinery are supported through this difficult time. The Government believes the business's leadership have a responsibility to the workers and the local community, and we are calling on them to do the right thing and provide support to the workers through this difficult period. The wealthy owner cannot wash his hands of his obligations to the workers and their families. And that's why we are calling on him to put his hands in his pockets and deliver proper compensation for the workers. The Government will now urgently work with the company and trade unions to explore what further support can be offered for the workforce. And that will include the maximum possible help to ensure workers can pursue new job opportunities if the refinery cannot be sold. Fourth, more widely, we are committed to securing the long-term future of the UK's refinery sector. It's important to say that the UK has a refining sector with a number of well-run operators. I met the refining sector earlier this month for a ministerial roundtable, and they told me that they hadn't had such a meeting with government for 13 years. The reality is the previous government left the UK's refining sector facing significant long-term challenges. And we know there are global challenges too, including competition from larger refining operations in the Middle East, India and Africa. We've already seen the effects of years of negligence from previous governments, and this government has been left to pick up the pieces. For our refining sector as a whole, the UK government is determined to work with industry, workers and trade unions to ensure we safeguard our refineries for the future. That's why we're reviewing the methodology for the energy-intensive industries compensation scheme that we inherited from the last government. The refinery sector is not covered by this scheme, and this review will help assess whether sectors like this should be covered in the future and whether more can be done to help their competitiveness. And that's not all, Madam Deputy Speaker. In less than 12 months in office, we've invested in CCUS, which can help key refineries such as Phillips 66 and Stanlow through Viking and Hynet. We've funded Project Willow at Grangemouth, a project that can help all refineries meet future challenges. And we're driving forward with the Sustainable Aviation Fuel mandate to help refining sectors maximise the opportunities created by the clean energy revolution. Madam Deputy Speaker, from the moment we were informed of these issues, the Government has been focused on securing the future of the Prax Lindsay oil refinery site and supporting its workers. Today, those workers have been badly let down by this company. But we are committed to supporting them and the wider community during this difficult time. And the Government is absolutely committed to a long-term future for the UK's refinery sector. We will provide further updates on the steps that I have set out in this statement over the weeks and months ahead, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank the honourable gentleman for advance side of his statement and for taking the time to speak with me on this issue earlier today. Today, hundreds of jobs are at risk and a strategically significant asset is in jeopardy. The refinery has a capacity of roughly equivalent to 35% of British petrol consumption and 10% of British diesel. The refinery supplies aviation fuel to Heathrow Airport via a pipeline. Refineries represent a core strategic interest for the United Kingdom. We are reassured that the oil and gas fields to the west of Shetland are not at risk, nor are the network of petrol stations affected by the announcement today, and I would like to reiterate that that side of the operation is not at risk. The Lindsay oil refinery has been loss-making since acquired from Total Energies in 2021, and we are aware of long-standing financial issues with the Prax Group, including being unable to provide accounts to Government. As such, we support the Government in ordering an investigation into the conduct of the directors and the circumstances surrounding this insolvency. But it is clear, despite any individual management issues facing the specific company, and these, as the Minister has said, are multiple, that the refining industry as a whole is being driven into the ground by the high cost of energy in this country. In the late 1970s, Great Britain had 17 oil refineries. If the Lindsay refinery in the Humber does close its doors, only 4 will remain. Energy is the single largest cost of operating a refinery. The sky-high cost of energy to industry in the UK is pushing manufacturers and energy-intensive industries like refineries out of business. And as Sir Jim Ratcliffe of INEOS has said, the chemical sector is facing extinction because of enormously high energy prices and crippling carbon tax bills. Industry in the United Kingdom is uncompetitive. 2 oil refineries closing within 6 months. It's quite clear we have to have a rethink. If our route to lowering emissions in the UK is at the price of deindustrialisation of jobs, livelihoods and economic growth, if it means impoverishing the UK and increasing dependency on imports and a fragile supply chain for fuel and essential oil products, then we must rethink. If the Secretary of State brings refineries into the scope of the Energy-Intensive Industries Compensation Scheme, he is providing only a sticking plaster response. Exempting specific industries from policy costs, the renewable obligation, the feed-in tariff, the cost for contracts for different subsidies and capacity market payments does not fix the foundations. This piecemeal approach simultaneously accepts the devastating consequences of green levies on the industry whilst abdicating responsibility for fixing the root problem. We are already seeing the real impact on working people, on their livelihoods and communities if action is not taken. 400 jobs lost at Grangemouth, 60 at Moorcroft Pottery in Stoke, over 1,000 at Vauxhall and Luton, 250 at Electric Grass Fibre in Wigan, and now Prax at Lindsay with 440 employed at that oil refinery. Unite the Union have warned the Government that its policies have placed the oil and gas industry on a cliff edge. This Government is driving up the cost of energy, increasing reliance on imports and offshoring our carbon emissions. It's not good for the climate and it's very bad for Britain. Refineries have consistently raised the existential issues facing the sector. The cost of the emissions trading scheme, eye-wateringly high energy bills. Since the closure of Grangemouth, no action has been taken by this Government to tackle the fundamental problem, to reduce the burden on businesses, to make UK manufacturing more competitive and to back British industry. So can I ask the Minister, what is the Government's plans for the Lindsay refinery? Does he expect to find an operator, and how long will the Government support the refinery, and what plans do they have for the refinery if no buyer is forthcoming? What action will he and his Government take to ensure this situation is not replicated at Britain's 4 remaining refineries? How many petroleum refineries does he expect to be left by the time the Labour Government leaves office in 2029? And what will the Government do to take action on bringing bills down for all industrial energy consumers and not just those covered by the Energy-Intensive Industries Compensation Scheme?
Well, can I thank the Shadow Minister, first of all, for quite rightly, I think, repeating the fact that not all of the business that we've been discussing in this statement has gone into administration today. That's really important to say that there is certainty in other parts of the business. We'll be able to outline more of that in the days and weeks ahead. And thank him also for his and his party's support of the investigation that the Secretary of State has launched into the conduct of the directors. Clearly something has gone badly wrong here, and it is important that we get to the bottom of that. On his 3 specific questions, I think, first of all, the government has backed the official receiver who is now running the refinery in the short term. We will be using that time to see if there is the possibility of finding a buyer. Clearly, our very first option would be to see if someone would want to take on the refinery as a going concern, and we will put every effort into trying to find that. If that's not possible, then we'll be looking at what the wider future of the site could look like and what possibilities there are for other industries on that site. On the wider question, he says fixing the root of the problem. I have to gently say to him, though, that he and his party oppose the action that will fix the root of the problem, which is our continued exposure to volatile fossil fuel prices that has driven up the cost of electricity, and households and businesses right across the country, he rightly says, are paying the price of that. But while we've got an answer to that, to move much faster towards a clean power system, with renewables and nuclear in the system that brings down cost and delivers that power here in the UK rather than relying on that casino for volatile fossil fuels, he opposes it. And the reality here is that he can't, on the one hand, call for us to fix the root of the problem, as he puts it, and then oppose the very action that will do that. We've outlined the credible plan for how we'll deliver cheaper electricity for all consumers, including businesses across the country, and we're getting on with delivering it. They're opposing all of those initiatives.
Chair of the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend, the Minister, recognised the importance for our energy security of securing the fuel supply at Lindsay. He also recognised the importance of engaging with the trade unions to attempt at least to reassure the workforce. Can I thank him and congratulate him on those actions and indeed on the engagement since the election that the government has had with this sector. Refinery operations are increasingly challenging, not least because of the volatility and uncertainty in international fossil fuel markets that the Minister just mentioned, but also because of the competition across the world. Phillips 66 and Stanlow, which he mentioned in his statement, are adapting to the changes in our energy system, taking advantage of carbon capture and the production of SAF and biofuels. So will he ensure that the UK refinery sector is part of the energy transition and a key part of our energy and industrial strategies, so they play a key part in the future for the communities and workers that depend on those jobs at the moment, and that we don't see any kind of cliff edge?
Yeah, well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. First of all, he's right to restate what I said in the statement, that it is extraordinary, frankly, when I brought in the refinery industry for a round table to be told that it was the first time in 13 years that had happened. That is an extraordinary state of affairs. I'm glad that we have now done that. But what it has highlighted is just how much engagement is now necessary with that sector, and I'm determined to drive that forward. He's right about the nature of the transition. Refineries will be important at all stages of the transition. They are critically important now, clearly, in delivering on our fuel security. They will play a really important role in that in the future, in sustainable aviation fuel, in biofuels, and in the wider work that we need that sector to do. And we'll support it to transition into what some of those future technologies could look like. The bottom line here is that in this particular case, we seem to have had a business that was far from doing that, not driving forward the investment that was necessary, and we will now, at pace, try to get to the bottom of what the directors were doing with this company. It is a shocking state of affairs, a sad day for the workers, but I do genuinely believe that there is a strong refining sector in the future.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Heylings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would also like to thank the Minister for advance notice of their statement today. And our thoughts, as with many, are with those workers at the Lindsay refinery who've heard this last-minute shocking news today, with putting their future and jobs on hold. And we understand this is just one refinery within the Prax Group, but the threatened closure will be sending shockwaves across their wider operations, with their newly acquired oil fields to the west of Shetland and roughly 200 petrol stations in the UK under the Breeze and Harvest Energy brands. While these facilities are outside the insolvency process as things stand, workers in these upstream businesses and the wider community will understandably be very worried about the impact of the insolvency on their jobs in future. And there are indeed questions to be asked, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the company bosses in both State Oil and the Prax Group, and it's good to hear the Secretary of State's announcement of an investigation into how they have let workers down. And we also do welcome the Minister's words that the company should also bear some responsibility and accountability for jobs and skills for those workers if it turns out that the company closes. We also welcome the Government's proposals to consider adding refineries to the National Capacity Compensation Scheme for energy-intensive industries. Once again, as we've heard, we see UK industry buckling under soaring energy costs, some of the highest in Europe, with workers left to pay the price. However, many in this House will feel a troubling sense of déjà vu following on from the Grangemouth job losses. We've heard from the Minister about the state of the refining industries and the fact that you've seen them for the first time in 13 years. Situations such as this make it yet clearer that the Government must set out a comprehensive and strategic plan for workers in the oil and gas industry to support the redeployment of skills and training as part of a just transition. The recent report by Robert Gordon University warned that the